Welcome to your introduction to fair housing. Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, as amended, otherwise known as the Fair Housing Act, prohibits discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of dwellings and in other housing-related transactions. These are based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, including children under the age of 18, living with parents or legal custodians, pregnant women, and people securing custody of children under the age of 18. This includes disability. So now that we've gone over the overview, here are a few other subjects we plan to cover today. The essence of fair housing is to give everyone who is qualified an equal opportunity to buy or lease the home of their choice, and to give them equal enjoyment of the home they choose. Unfortunately, many people were being denied their rights due to certain characteristics, so laws had to be passed to protect the rights of the public. Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 was signed into law on April 11, 1968. In recognizing specific characteristics that were being discriminated against, established the first four federally protected classes: race, color, religion, and national origin. In 1974, sex was added, and in the Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988, the last two federally protected classes were added, which is disability and familial status. Collectively, these are all called the Fair Housing Act, or FHA. Here are some important definitions for you to remember regarding each of these protected classes. Race refers to a family, tribe, or group of people coming from the same common ancestors. A good example would be if you were African American and you deny anyone other than your own race an apartment. Color refers to the color of an individual's skin. A good example would be not wanting to show someone an apartment because the color of their skin is different from yours. Religion refers to all aspects of religious belief, observance, and practice. A good example would be discriminating against a non-Catholic because of their religion. National origin refers to the country in which a person was born or from which the person's ancestors came. For example, discrimination against a Puerto Rican individual by a Mexican property owner. Sex includes gender, male or female, gender identity, and gender expression. It also includes, but is not limited to, pregnancy, childbirth, or conditions related to pregnancy or childbirth. Familial status refers to a situation where there is one or more persons under the age of 18 who reside with a parent or legal guardian. This also applies in the case of pregnancy or for people who are in the process of gaining legal custody of a person under the age of 18. Forcing families with children to live on the first floor or not renting to individuals with young children is a good example. Handicap or disability is any person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, has a record of such impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment. In general, a physical or mental impairment includes hearing, mobility, and visual impairments, chronic alcoholism, chronic mental illness, AIDS, age-related complex, and mental retardation that substantially limits one or more major life activities. The essence of fair housing is equal opportunity, which doesn't always look fair. But in order to comply with federal, state, and local fair housing laws, multifamily professionals must provide an equal opportunity for everyone to buy or lease the home of their choice provided they qualify, and have equal enjoyment of the home they've purchased or leased. As multifamily professionals, the most important thing to remember about the FHA is that it's not always about fair. It's always about equal. While it's true that many fair housing classes tell us to treat everyone the same, fair housing compliance is not always about same treatment. Fair housing is always about equal opportunity and consistent treatment for same circumstances. We'll take a closer look at how this distinction informs what we say and do. But first, here's some important information. We are not attorneys, and this information is not intended to be legal advice. This information is based on industry best practices and is offered as such. Do not change any of the policies and procedures at the community without specific permission of your supervisor. If you have any questions about a situation, ask your supervisor for direction. As leasing professionals, our job with regard to fair housing compliance is to treat everyone in an equal and consistent manner so that they feel welcome and are offered either the opportunity to lease an apartment home if they are prospects or the opportunity for equal enjoyment of their apartment home if they are residents. The most important thing to remember when interacting with your customers, prospects, or residents is to be consistent in your treatment of them based upon their situation and circumstances, not their personal attributes. We care about prospects meeting our qualifying standards and residents complying with our lease and house rules. We don't care about their personal attributes, such as race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, or handicap, which just so happens to be the federal protected classes. We also don't care about their age, sexual orientation, marital status, or creed. Fair housing compliance doesn't mean you can't talk about the fact that your prospect recently moved here from another country. Fair housing compliance requires us to evaluate the prospect's application to lease based on our qualifying standards and not where they just moved here from. If we deny their application because they don't meet one of our qualifying standards, income, credit, or landlord history, that is legal. If we deny their application because of where they moved here from, that is illegal. In other words, we cannot discriminate in the treatment of someone based upon anything other than their failure to meet our qualifying standards. Discrimination, according to dictionary.com, is treatment or consideration of or making a distinction in favor of or against a person or thing based on the group, class, or category to which that person or thing belongs rather than on individual merit, racial and religious intolerance, and discrimination. To comply with fair housing, remember to treat each person as a unique individual. Focus only on what they want and need in their new apartment home and whether they qualify for the home that they want. While it is impossible to completely eliminate the possibility of being named in a fair housing complaint, it is possible to minimize the damage, and this is the first step. Also remember that discrimination is in the eye and ear of the beholder, and that fair housing compliance is based upon impact, not intention. If someone feels like you are treating them in a discriminatory manner, they can file a complaint, even if you don't feel as though you treated them in a discriminatory manner. And if something you do or say is found to violate a federal, state, or local fair housing law, it doesn't matter whether you intended to violate the law. It only matters that you did violate the law. In case you were wondering, there are no do-overs. No, oh, that's not what I meant. If you said it or did it, then you own it. Look, there is no way to guarantee that you will never be named in a fair housing complaint or lawsuit, even if you dot every I and cross every F for fair housing, because anyone can file a complaint, even if you did everything right. The best you can hope for is to minimize the damage, and the best way to do that is to proactively practice fair housing. In other words, don't focus on what you can and cannot say and do. Focus on offering everyone who is qualified an equal opportunity to lease a home and offering every resident equal access and enjoyment. Greeting a walk-in and answering the phone. Never discourage a tour or an application, even if the prospect is not qualified. Once you've explained the qualifying standards to the prospect, it's up to them on whether or not they want a tour or submit an application. Have a defined route that you use for each prospect. If the prospect doesn't want to see something, the pool, tennis courts, or whatever, make a note on the guest card and skip that part for the tour. Be careful not to steer the prospect. Steering is defined as showing the prospect what you want them to see instead of showing them what they want to see. Now, it's okay to let the prospect steer you, but it's considered a violation of the Fair Housing Act for you to steer the prospect. It is best practice to show the same apartments to each prospect. For example, when you have a couple of market-ready two-bedroom apartments, each prospect who requests a two-bedroom apartment should be shown these apartments until the apartment is leased. If one apartment is on the first floor and the other apartment is on the third floor in a non-elevator building, and the prospect only wants to see first-floor apartments, it's fine to show only the first-floor apartment. That is an example of the prospect steering you, which is legal. An example of illegal steering would be if the prospect is in a wheelchair and you decide to show only the first-floor apartment because you think the prospect cannot negotiate the stairs. It's fine to say something like, I have a lovely 2-bedroom home on the 2nd floor I'd like to show you, as long as you say it to everyone. If the prospect says they don't want to see it, whether they're in a wheelchair or not, don't show it. Otherwise, show it. Show every prospect the same apartments within the style and size they requested. As shown in the example above, it's up to the prospect to determine what they want to see in terms of size, view, floor, and price. Even seemingly helpful advice can be misconstrued as steering. In the absence of a specific request from the prospect about a floor, view, or price, show each prospect the same apartment within the size and/or style requested. Make certain to document which apartments were shown on the prospect's guest card. Avoid using abbreviations or codes, as they could be misconstrued. Simply note which apartments were shown and also anything else that occurred on the tour regarding deviations from the tour route. Don't discourage anyone from submitting an application, even if you're 100% certain that the application will be denied. The best way to offer equal opportunity to lease is to give each prospect a copy of the qualifying standards and make certain that they read and understand the standards. After that, it's up to the prospect to determine if they want to submit an application to lease. We should not encourage or discourage them. Every applicant should be offered the same pricing, terms, and conditions for each apartment home. If a price special is being offered, it should be a price special for a particular apartment and not based on the person. If the policy requires a follow-up call, postcard, or thank you note, follow up with everyone and within a standard time period. If you place the follow-up phone call with everyone within 30 minutes of their visit, you should do that with everyone unless circumstances prevent it, in which case you should document what happened to delay the call. The Fair Housing Act tells us that everyone is entitled to equal enjoyment of their home and community, and the Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988 provides 2 ways to make that happen: accommodations and modifications. Accommodations are changes in the rules, policies, and procedures. Modifications are physical changes to the apartment home, the common areas, amenity areas, and so on and so forth. Each request must be evaluated to determine if it satisfies the definition of reasonable and if it is necessary due to the requester's disability. The evaluation is typically made by a manager or compliance officer. Make certain you know what the company policy and procedure is regarding requests for accommodations and modifications. It's important to know that we can never inquire as to the nature of a person's disability. Under certain conditions, we can inquire about the person's need for the disability. If you are uncertain about the company policy governing this practice, ask your supervisor. It is of the utmost importance that you know and follow the company policies regarding disabled prospects and residents. At the time of this writing, almost half of all fair housing complaints filed for the past 5 years have alleged that the person was denied equal opportunity to lease a home and/or equal access and opportunity to enjoy their home. If a resident or prospect appears to be disabled, do not ask them if they need an accommodation or modification. It is the responsibility of the disabled person to make the request, and we are not required to make the initial inquiry. The request for accommodation or modification may not sound obvious. For example, a prospect that requires an animal for emotional support may casually mention that they have a cat. When you respond that you don't allow pets in your community, the prospect may respond with, he or she is not a pet. That constitutes a request. If a prospect or resident requested accommodation or modification based on their disability, respond by saying, we'll be happy to consider your request. We'll just need to complete our request form. While you cannot force anyone to complete the request form, you should have a completed form for each request. If they won't complete the form, we suggest you complete it for them. Do not make any promises or offer any opinion about whether a request for an accommodation or modification will be approved, even if a number of seemingly similar requests have been approved. The law requires each request to be considered individually and treated as a unique request, and will be approved or denied on that basis. The majority of accommodation requests are about parking spaces and assistance animals. Your job is to follow the company policy about documenting the request and completing a request form. Do not attempt to determine if the prospect is actually disabled, if the animal is actually an assistive animal, or offer any opinion or statement about their request being approved or denied. As leasing professionals, we are often the first contact person for the prospect and the most frequent contact person for the resident. One very important part of our job is to collect information and pass it along to the final decision maker. The manager who approves or denies leasing applications, the compliance officer who reviews and either approves or denies accommodation and modification requests, and any other team members who rely on accurate and timely information to make operational decisions. In this role, it's not our job to vote on a prospect's leasing application or a resident's accommodation modification request. Our job is to get as much accurate information and pass it along to the decision maker without encouraging or discouraging the applicant or resident. In the absence of a scripted response to any question about the availability of an accommodation or modification, simply say, "We're happy to consider your request. Let's fill out a request form." Here are some fair housing do's and don'ts. Always be consistent in your treatment of everyone. Document everything. Be polite, professional, and welcoming, regardless of the customer's attitude. Always ask a supervisor if you are unsure about a situation. Be friendly, not friends with your customer. Don't ever ask a customer if they need an accommodation or modification. It's their responsibility to request one. Don't ever say anything to a customer that you wouldn't be willing to repeat to a judge. Don't steer. Show the prospect what they want to see. Don't make any exceptions to any policies or procedures unless specifically directed to do so by a supervisor. Don't ever ask why someone needs an accommodation or modification. We never ask about the nature of a person's disability. This completes your introduction to fair housing. Remember, ABC equals always be conscious. Be present. Keep your head where your feet are when interacting with someone, and be polite, professional, and welcoming. Thank you for watching.